Welcome to the Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Michael Baranowski, a political scientist at Northern Kentucky University. With me today for our midweek show is my regular co-host, Cleveland area attorney and Republican factotum, Jay Carson. How are you, Jay?
Hey, I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing just fine, actually. I thought for this show it was a busy week, and there were some things we didn't get to on the weekend show. So I thought we could start by getting to some of those things that aren't exactly as time sensitive, but I think we both felt were important to talk about.
Right.
So to start off, I thought we could talk about the federal court ruling that said that President Trump can't block certain people from his Twitter feed because it's a violation of the First Amendment, and that basically the president's attempts to silence these critics isn't okay because Twitter, at least in this instance, this specific instance, is a public forum, which seems kind of weird in a way because, of course, Twitter is a private sort of thing, private company with its own rules. And so I was a little, maybe not perplexed, but I was maybe a little bit surprised by this. And I thought, Jay, as our resident attorney, you could weigh in on this. Well, what did you think about this ruling?
Well, this is not the first of this kind of type of ruling in the country. This is something. There have been a couple others. I want to say the Third Circuit had a case on this, and I could be wrong on the circuit, but I'm right on the holding of the case. The gist of this is, typically, if the government creates a public forum for speech, they cannot, that public forum has to be content neutral. So meaning if you say, hey, we're going to have comments at City Hall at the, city council meeting, the government can't say, okay, we're only going to accept, comments in favor of this piece or that piece. So what the courts have done, and the unusual thing, and then again, this Third Circuit case is fairly fact specific, and I should have looked up and gotten the name, but we can find it and put it on the website. Is that if a elected official is sort of conducting public business in that forum, if he's he or she is using it as a sounding board for constituents, then it does qualify as a public forum. Now, the difference being, say, if you have just a campaign website where it's just a matter of, hey, I'm going to be, showing up at this event, come out and see me, or vote for me, or my opponent's, a total loser, whatever. Those kind of things, in most cases, according to what the courts have said, would not be public forums because it's not a matter of you're inviting the public in as a matter of to conduct public business there. I would agree. I think it's a little weird and probably a little overreaching to say, because at the same time, hey, it's your Twitter account. You ought to be able to ban people as you see fit. And hilariously, one of them is Rosie O'Donnell, which
that is funny.
Which was probably the first one. But I think this is an area of the law which is going to evolve a little bit as we get the mix between public business and social media gets more and more caught up, brought together. So I think there are more cases to be out there, but the basic framework, and this is what the court followed in the Trump decision, was essentially saying, look, this guy uses Twitter as a public policy tool, announcement, and sort of invites comments. It's not simply a matter of Donald Trump private Twitter. So, I mean, I'm not crazy about it. I think there are more lines to be drawn, and this is going to be more sussed out as things move forward. Or the other situation, I think, is politicians can be a little more cognizant of what they're doing, and create a clearer separation between, say, a public
Twitter account?
The person that the person I'm just thinking. Well, I said Congress. It was a county commissioner who was blocking people between a campaign website, a campaign Twitter account, versus one that is actually involved in public business and therefore creating a public forum.
Yeah, because Donald Trump actually does have a official presidential Twitter account. I mean, most people I think are subscribed to the real Donald Trump, but he actually has a at POTUS account as well. And so let me ask you this, Jay. So that would mean while the government has to be content neutral on this, Twitter could decide that they just want to cut off certain people for whatever reasons they decide. And as a private entity, they could do that, but the president can't do that.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. I just wanted to be clear on that. Not that they would do
that.
that.
Let's put it this way. I don't know if that case has ever been brought yet. But it would be more on the line of say, some networks decide they're going to carry the president's State of the Union address, and some decide they're not. I don't know that there's any
right.
But
I mean, some people might say, well, how is this what the president did different from, say, deciding who's going to get White House press credentials to be part of briefings, that kind of thing? I mean, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, but the reasoning behind it would be one, it's White House press credentials. It's a factor of space and availability, and the room is always only so big, and security clearances and all that. The other part of it is, Twitter is designed to be interactive, and so here's the thing: if Trump can say, "Hey, I'm not only going to give press credentials to certain news outlets," which he kind of played around with at one point, and everybody said, "Oh, he can't do that." I think that would be problematic if he were going to say. And again, it's also a little different between press reporting, where you're having people show up to cover a public event. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. As opposed to inviting public comment. I mean, a lot of course, the White House press, there's sort of public comment that's kind of embedded in a lot of their questions. But it's not purely a public speech forum like, your soapbox in the park kind of thing of look, you can stand up and say whatever you want. Again, governments can create reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions about, okay, you can say whatever you want between the hours of, 8 and 5 p.m., but you can't do it at 3 a.m. with a bullhorn. I mean, those kind of things. But they can have those kind of reasonable restrictions, but they can't say you can have your speech as long as it's pro-government.
Right.
That's the constitutional issue. So,
I think all in all, I find myself sort of feeling like this was a little bit of an overreach, but I take your point that this is there's a lot of gray involved with all this.
Right. I would say this overreaches, and I don't know if it stands up on appeal, assuming it goes to appeal, because I do think there's going to be some sort of countervailing. I think what we may end up happening is that we create some sort of new pseudo public forum, if you know what I mean, where I think the law is going to have to adapt to social media, because again, the laws that we have regarding this public forum are based on things like, the billboard at City Hall sort of thing, of where if we allow one group to put up something, that you have to allow another billboard group to put up something. And our laws just haven't caught up to social media.
Yeah, absolutely. Another big story that we would have loved to have covered the main show on Saturday was a really important, potentially important arbitration ruling. It was a 5-4 Supreme Court ruling with the 5 conservatives on one side and the 4 liberals on the other side, saying essentially that it was an arbitration ruling, basically saying that companies may require workers to settle disputes through individual arbitration, despite what the National Labor Relations Act said about allowing collective action for the purposes of mutual aid and protection. And so let me make sure I understand this correctly, Jay. Is now the National Labor Relations Act was passed. It basically, again, said that employees can engage in this collective action.
It's essentially a right to unionize. Yeah.
But then I think right around a decade or so after that, Congress passed the Federal Arbitration Act, which said that the courts should enforce arbitration agreements according to, well, whatever the terms were in those agreements, basically. And so my understanding is what the 5 justices in the majority said is, well, you can agree or disagree with the wisdom of arbitration. And you know how I feel about arbitration, Jay.
I know how you feel about
it. I am not a big fan of arbitration. I think it's another way for the big corporate monsters to trample the little guy underfoot. But that's okay. I'm putting that aside.
Listeners should know. Last week I sent Mike a link from the International Chamber of Commerce touting Paris Arbitration Week.
Yeah.
That's coming up. So we're going to sign it. It's probably as much fun as Paris Fashion Week, but with more arbitration.
Yeah. Well, but my point was, at least my understanding is in the majority opinion, which Judge Gorsuch wrote, said basically that, well, you can debate the policy, but in terms of law, hey, the Federal Arbitration Act says this, full stop. It doesn't say anything about overruling anything about the National Labor Relations Act. It doesn't, there was nothing, given the fact that it was passed after, if Congress had wanted to make an exception, they would have mentioned that specifically, but they didn't. And so therefore, this is a simple a pretty straightforward statutory interpretation thing. Whereas the 4 dissenters, Justice Ginsburg wrote the dissent. She called the decision egregiously wrong, and she actually read part of the dissent from the bench, basically. But it seemed to me that a lot of her argument was about why arbitration is a bad thing. She wrote,
"Man, you're seeing the light there, yeah."
She wrote, trying to arbitrate such claims individually would be too expensive to be worth it. Amen. And the risks of employer retaliation would likely dissuade most workers from seeking redress alone. Again, I entirely agree. She points out how much more of a big thing that arbitration has become. And again, I totally agree with her on every single aspect of policy. But that doesn't mean she's right on interpreting the law. And so that's where...
And those would be great arguments to make before Congress.
Yeah, and so, and then Gorsuch, in fact, said that. She said that, her objections are to policy, and those are not decisions for the court to make, but for policymakers to make. And again, I agree that Congress erred grievously in having things set up the way they are, but this isn't for the courts to decide. And I was sort of disappointed that all 4 of the court's liberals, at least it would have been nice if one of them would have said, well, yeah, we hate this as a matter of policy, but as a matter of statutory interpretation, I don't think this is really a hard decision as a matter of statutory interpretation. And I hate saying that because this totally goes against the outcome that I want.
Well, good. That's a sign of growth, and that's a sign of. I think it was Gorsuch in his confirmation hearing who quoted Scalia that said, if you're a judge and you're always ruling and you're getting the desire that you want, then you're probably not being a very good judge.
Yeah.
So no, look, I think the Gorsuch opinion, which is his first, I'd say, real big, writing the opinion. It's wonderful and it's very readable. For if you think this is all going to be legalese and so forth and difficult to get through, it's very readable. I don't want to say breezy, but he boils it down really well and I think comes to the right conclusion. And rightfully takes the dissenters to task for making what is basically a policy argument. And to your point, I really think, look, the country is better served if the cause is you think arbitration agreements have gone too far. The cause, which I don't, but the cause is better served by writing an opinion that says, look, we think this is absolutely a terrible, a bad result. But there's nothing we can do about it under law because we're, as the court, required to interpret statutes as written. but Congress ought to do something about this.
Absolutely.
That's a much more powerful statement.
Yeah, and I thought we would agree entirely on the legal side of this. And of course, you are not at all unhappy in terms of the policy outcome, whereas I am extraordinarily unhappy about that. But longtime listeners know.
Again, I mean, part of the as a conservative, I'm happy on the policy thing, sort of happy. I'm more happy on the non-judicial activism piece of it,
Sure.
that we're going to take this statute and we're going to do what it says and not impose our policy wishes where Congress has apparently chosen another policy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Right. You know, another interesting thing that's been going on, well, not just in the last week, but really over the last few months, is that there's been this sort of, I wouldn't call it a rebellion exactly, but there's been around 20 House Republicans who are trying to actually go against the leadership and force a series of immigration bills to the floor for debate and votes. And they can do this. The House rules say that you can use something called a discharge petition, which if you can get a majority of people to sign it, takes something out of committee and puts it on the floor for debate and then a vote. And they were basically been threatening to do this because they really want to take a vote on this, which just, again, regards the Dreamers, giving them some sort of a permanent status. And of course, this is something that the leadership has said, you know what, we don't want to do this because we don't want to take any kind of a politically dicey vote before the November elections. And this has certainly been strongly opposed by the Freedom Caucus and anti-immigration folks who are concerned that this would be some sort of a path to citizenship, which they definitely don't want. And right now, it looks like there's been some sort of a accommodation, I guess, arrived at. That there might be something that goes forward, but the question is sort of what sort of language do they want to use, and can it be something that makes enough of the hard right happy about that? But it's really kind of because interesting seeing these groups in the party sort of fight it out. What do you thought about this, Jay?
Yeah, this is fun. Back when I worked for the Ohio legislature, we had a discharge petition situation one time. It was crazy. But I mean, we should make clear to listeners, the way a bill usually works is it's introduced, it goes to a committee, and then is assigned to a specific committee to be worked on. After it's worked on, or if not, the committee chairman chooses to report that back to the rules and reference. I'm trying to think if they call it the same thing in the House as they do in Ohio, but essentially it's the speaker's call. Then after a bill has been reported out of committee, when and if that bill is scheduled for a floor vote. Now, obviously, what can happen sometimes is a committee chairman can say, I'm not happy with this. I don't want to send this, often in consultation with the House leadership. We'll say, look, just sit on this bill. Don't do anything. A discharge petition is this procedural maneuver which allows a majority to pull it out of that committee and directly to a floor vote. So it's sort of a democratic small d type end around House leadership.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of these Republicans who are for this, they're one thing that ties a number of them together. I think the 12 of the 20 are in fairly competitive races.
Right.
But another thing is that our farm system basically in this country runs based on immigrant labor, and I've done some research on this. I wrote some articles on the website. You can actually find them. Around half of the workforce is in certain sectors is illegal, and there are a lot of reasons for this. But the concern here among a lot of folks is they're getting pushback from businesses saying, "Hey, listen, if this immigration thing, this anti-immigration thing, really gets pushed hard, we're going to be in big trouble because we won't have people to pick our fruit, to get our crops in and all this stuff." And so they're getting a lot of business pushback on this.
Yeah.
And so I mean, that's a big, motivator.
And I think it's interesting, too, that the opposition to the discharge petition comes from two different sources and for two different reasons. I would understand that Paul Ryan and the leadership would not want to bring something like this to a vote because there would be members that it would hurt. They would be in a tough situation. The reason was sometimes votes, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. So the best way to get around that is to not vote, not schedule a thing for a vote. And you can still, that way, Republicans who are on one side of the issue can argue one thing, Republicans on the other can argue another. So, I mean, these folks in tighter districts can make the argument that they're all for Dreamers. But the Freedom Caucus, again, they're arguing against it almost on policy grounds that, look, they just don't want to see an immigration bill passed. So, again, it's sort of strange bedfellows between the Freedom Caucus and Paul Ryan in this case. The other thing that I think is maybe a little interesting just to add to this context is that, House leadership is still a little and again, I don't have any insight into this. It's simply what I read in the paper. But with Paul Ryan stepping down, I don't know that there's a lot of clear direction coming from the top. And again, I could be wrong. That's just what I pick up from reading the papers. And if I'm wrong, I apologize to those I'm upset. But I think that comes at part of it too.
And well,
I think with the speaker stepping down, necessarily it loosens the reins a little bit,
right.
And people are more apt to try this sort of thing because look, they're less likely to get punished for it.
Yeah, although the Freedom Caucus certainly has not been shy about this throughout.
Well, they're always getting punished.
Yeah, basically, and also they managed to at least temporarily torpedo the Farm Bill over immigration concerns as well. So, and this is something that it's not. I would say it may be worse now than it used to be, but this is not something that's at all uncommon. We see this in legislative politics all the time, where if you have a majority, but you have an element within that majority that's different, they band together and they can actually have outsized influence for exactly these reasons, because it's all about building that majority coalition. If one group just decides to, scream, we're not going to go along, that can cause real problems, certainly. And this is related too. I wanted to ask you about this. This is a semi-related thing. I posted this on the Facebook group this week. This whole E-Verify thing. Now, you know what E-Verify is, Jay?
I do.
It's that system where it's that system for listeners who don't. That system where employers can, if they so desire, verify that the people who are applying for positions are actually legally in this country to check their immigration status. Now, it's only mandated in a number of states, and some people would say, well, geez, if you're concerned about
8 states, I think.
Yeah, I mean, not very many, obviously. It's a lot less than 50. And some people would say, well, geez, if you're so concerned about people being in this country illegally, if the reason they're coming to this country in many cases is to get work, and you want to stop that, if there were a robust E-Verify system nationally, wouldn't that make a whole lot of sense? Yet E-Verify, national E-Verify mandatory legislation has basically gone nowhere in Congress, which to some people would say, well, what's going on here? So, Jay, what do you think's going on here?
Well, Democrats actually have been fairly front and center against this for some time. I think I want to say 2013 was the last time that this kind of really bubbled up, that there was a potential to get this done. I'm sure that there have been bills introduced since, but it was sort of some stern Democratic resistance to it. So that I think is part
in
of
the past. But of course, Republicans are in the majority, so it's not like Republicans said, "Oh, the Democrats are concerned about this, so we probably shouldn't push it." I mean,
well, no. But my sense is you still wouldn't be able to get it through the Senate.
Well, you would think if it were this really sensible move to slow illegal immigration, that there would be a huge push for it, but we really haven't seen that on the right.
Yeah. Well, I think in some quarters on the right you have. Other quarters, not so much, based out of concerns that it's going to be an expensive mandate on small businesses. So the Cato Institute, for example, has taken the position the Verify is bad, for the problem that it imposes a mandate on businesses. Now, I think they might have less of a problem if it was paid for, but look, if you're asking me, personally, I would be of the opinion that people ought to do this, and that's not to say that businesses don't verify citizenship other ways. I mean, typically, you maybe you provide a birth certificate or driver's license or something like that. And in many cases, I think businesses would say, look, we don't need to spend the money and the time on e-verify. We can just say, hey, show up with these documents, or here, hey, show me your green card. Essentially, that they can get around it. They can satisfy the requirement that way. So I think those are the issues. But
I mean, fraud in that, those kind of, you're right, documents have to be presented, but there's huge fraud in that. And basically, I mean, you're right. It's the cost. It imposes more of a cost to hire legal workers. So in other words, basically following the law is more expensive. I mean, essentially.
It always is. I mean, that's sort of.
But here's the point that, and this is why I'm for this, is we know there have been a number of studies and exposés and so forth. Workers who are working illegally have a lot less control over what happens and the conditions that they have to work under in many of these cases. I mean, we're talking about pretty horrific abuses because the business owners can basically hang the, well, you want to stay in this country sort of thing over their heads. And so this is a real disaster for worker treatment, working conditions and so forth, especially in the agricultural sector. And so I think there's a good worker rights, human rights argument for this. And what I see is the main reason we don't have this is, again, the business community saying, no, we like our illegal workers because we can do what we want with them and they're cheaper. And I just think, even if, regardless of what you think from policy, from a moral standpoint, I think that's wrong.
Yeah. No, I can't disagree with you there.
There you go. We have a little bit more time. There was one listener comment, actually on Facebook this week, that came in that I wanted to discuss a little bit. It's from Tony, who wrote, let's see, my issue is that sometimes you are a bit too much in the middle. I think he's talking about me here. He says, when Paul Ryan...
Nobody ever says that about me. No, I take that back. Actually, I did have someone say that to me just the other day. So
it doesn't happen too often. Yeah. Well, Tony says, when Paul Ryan wants to cut social programs, he's advocating for the deaths of thousands of people. You need to go a bit harder on Republicans and Democrats when it comes to this. Also, the plain bribery that is going on sometimes, I feel like you are too soft on that. How can money be more powerful than votes in a democracy? So, well, I guess, Tony, I'd say there are a couple things here. With the whole Paul Ryan and conservatives advocating deaths of people, I mean, I've certainly heard that on the left. I guess I don't. Maybe that
was his campaign slogan, I believe.
Well, I understand the argument, certainly, and in some cases, I get the logic saying that, well, if we do this, these are what we believe the outcomes to be. Therefore, if you support this, you are de facto supporting the deaths of these people, basically, and that's kind of the argument. So I get that, but the way I see it, in most cases, people like Paul Ryan are, number one, in many cases, don't accept the premise that this will lead to these deaths or these negative outcomes. But number two, even if they do accept that premise, in some cases, what they will often argue is, yes, there will be these bad things that happen, including maybe deaths in the short term, but we believe that in the long term, this will actually save lives and make people better off. And so I guess where I'm coming from on this and why I'm not harder on these arguments is that I have a tendency to default to the idea that people like Paul Ryan care about the country, want to do what's best for everyone, and don't really want to see anyone hurt or disadvantaged if it can be at all avoided. Now, some people may question it, and certainly I think there are some people who don't believe that, but by and large, that's kind of my default position. And, maybe you say I'm being naive about that. I don't know. I mean, I've talked to people who've held office. Jay, you certainly have talked even more than I have. My sense is that Democrat, Republican, they're kind of fundamentally decent people who want to do the right thing. I mean, they're no less moral than anyone else, I don't think. And so that's why I kind of have a problem with saying, well, Paul Ryan or anyone really is, advocating for people to be hurt or harmed or killed or something like that.
Yeah, I would add, again, I've interacted with politicians, um, and I've a lot of times been in the room, when people have had serious discussions about these issues, serious private discussions about this kind of thing. And never once in my experience have I heard or even sensed from someone of, I want to do this because it's going to kill people.
Well, sure. I mean, obviously
I mean,
not to that extent, but I think
well,
it's
no,
more
no, but
like
what
just
I think is
being,
the argument is that, or let's put it this way, even been in a room where someone would be indifferent to, um,
yeah. And
that,
I
oh,
think
well,
that's more the argument.
millions will die, but so what?
Yeah.
I just
Although,
don't.
yeah, but I think it's more like, well, yeah, maybe they're going to be face more pain, but basically screw them. They didn't vote for us.
Right.
But you're saying I mean, you haven't really heard much of
Well,
that either.
face more pain. Let's put it this way. I mean, in any sort of policy enactment, there usually are going to be winners and losers,
Sure.
and it's typically economic winners and losers. It's not you're going to die or not. So I mean, if you say face more pain, I guess suppose that's, um, that's a broader brush. But um, look, I also I did agree with the first point. I don't know that we've ever established um, the whole idea of, well, if you cut this social program, people will die. That's sort of like um, the left's sort of last barricade all the time and I can remember, um, work requirements being imposed on welfare recipients back in the Clinton era. I mean, that same argument was made when the Republican Congress talked about slowing the growth of Medicaid. Now, again, still increasing it, but slowing the growth. Again, it was literally pushing grandma off the cliff, and people will die. To me, anytime if you start with the people will die argument, my sense is I don't think you get taken that seriously.
Well, yeah,
Because it's I mean, look, in most cases, it's really just not a serious argument. I suppose there could be cases, um, but
well, I think on the other hand,
like,
I think, well, I think given what we know about people's cognitive biases and so forth, I think certainly everyone wants to think that they're a good person and their policies are going to be wonderful for everyone and so forth and so on. So, I mean, I accept that in certain instances, policies are going to be enacted, and in some cases, they will lead to deaths of people. I mean, you can think about, you talked about various domestic policies, but certainly when we decide to go to war with somebody,
well, yeah, no,
that
obviously
kind of thing.
something like that. Obviously, yeah.
And there have been people who certainly have made arguments saying, well, if there were a draft, or if the children of more members of Congress were in the military, and if we didn't have this kind of separate kind of military class, maybe they'd be less likely to throw us into these situations, that kind of thing. So, I think there is something to that sort of thing. But again, I think for me, what it comes down to is, despite the fact that people are imperfect and have these biases and so forth, I start from the assumption that everyone is, to the greater or lesser extent, kind of fundamentally wants kind of sort of the same kind of things. And if you don't start from there, well, then you're going to come to different conclusions, certainly. But the other part of it, the whole money being more powerful than votes in a democracy, yeah, I absolutely agree, Tony. You're totally right. I think there's been a history of recent Supreme Court decisions that have been disastrously wrong on this. I've talked at length about how I think the campaign finance system drives this sort of thing. And so, yeah, I mean, money is more powerful than votes, and more so now than ever. And I wish we could change that, but I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, I disagree with you a little on
Yeah,
that.
yeah, I figured
Well,
you
I
might.
mean, I'll ask you. I mean, who spent more in the 2016 election?
In terms of overall inside and outside spending, I think it was pretty close, actually. If you want to just look at campaigns, it's a different story, but I'm looking at
Sure.
overall spending.
Okay. Um, but let's put it this way. I don't. Again, and the actual campaign money has to go to the actual campaign, and there's issues with that. There's also in-kind union stuff and all that. But
Sure.
my point is, Trump was very much the underdog. He was very much underfunded compared to Clinton, and he won. I think a lot of what is that money used for that goes into campaigns is used for advertising, and if people you can sort of vaccinate yourself to that if you choose, um, and I think that's again, it doesn't happen as often, but I mean, look, you and I try to do it to try to say, hey, here's the issues, here's what you really need to think about, here's what to think through, here's how to think critically, um, and the message doesn't get to everyone, but maybe the reason that the money gets poured in is because it goes to advertising that people fall for, and you don't have to fall for it, and people don't always fall for it. There have been other plenty of times where campaigns have been the one with more funding has not won.
Yeah, but sure.
Look, we all say on average the guy who spends more money is more likely to win, but
and I'll issue a media correction. I just checked, and no, even considering outside money, still Hillary Clinton vastly outraised Donald Trump. But again, I would say Donald Trump, that's sort of a very unique situation, given the nature of Donald Trump and free media and all this other kind of stuff. But
sure, I'm going to throw in one other factor though. When the money is going, where does the money go? The money doesn't necessarily go to elect someone. The money sometimes follows who they think there is going to be elected.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not a leading indicator, it's a trailing indicator, if you will.
And to me, I would argue that even more troubling than some of the campaign stuff is the money, the spending that goes largely unreported, except if you're kind of a geeky person like myself who knows sites like opensecrets.org and checks them out, is the lobbying money, that kind of in between elections. Because I guess I get this. I mean, I do get this. Is we focus, and the media focuses almost exclusively on elections and big policy things. But I've said for forever that where most of the real action that affects people in their day-to-day lives isn't there, but it's in the regulatory agencies, it's in these smaller pieces, many smaller pieces of legislation and other stuff that just doesn't get the coverage. And so that's where money can have a big influence, I think.
Yep.
All right. I think that just about does it for this. Well, it wasn't exactly a listener comment episode, though we did get one in, but I think it was good that we were able to get in some of that extra stuff we weren't able to fit in. Hey, again, I mentioned this.
Court stuff, yeah.
There you go. I mentioned this on the Saturday show. It would really help us out a lot if you you haven't already, take this super short survey. I promise you, literally, I bet you'll get it done in 30 seconds. It's at survey.libsyn.com. That's LIBSYN.com/politics guys. Super short, super simple. It's going to help us a lot in terms of reaching a broader audience and keeping the show going. So please do that. Thanks very much. And of course, your support is what keeps the show going. We appreciate it. You know how to support us, I'm sure by now. Go to politicsguys.com/support, or just go to politicsguys.com and click on the support links you will see there. Also, subscribing to the show helps a lot, as does sharing episodes, as does leaving reviews and ratings on iTunes. If you want to get in touch with us, mail at politicsguys.com. There's also our Facebook page, facebook.com/politicsguys page. We're also on Twitter at politicsguys. The executive producers of the Politics Guys are Michael Baranowski, Jay Carson, Trey Orndorff, and Bruce Johnson. Today's show was produced by Michael Baranowski. We'll be back with a new show on Saturday. We hope you join us.